All right, there we go. So again, welcome everyone to our District 5 Measure W Town Hall. I really appreciate everyone spending their evening with us. My name's Nikki Fortunato Bas. I'm proud to be your supervisor on the Alameda County Board of Supervisors representing District 5. And this evening, the goals of our webinar are to share more information about the Measure W spending plan that the board approved on July 30th. To share my priorities for our spending plan and addressing homelessness, as well as hear yours, to discuss next steps around implementation and to answer your questions. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Please put your questions in the Q&A and we'll try to answer them during the webinar. We are also recording the event and we are going to share out the slides as well as the recording to everyone who registered, as well as in our social media, our newsletter, and our website. So next slide. So for today's agenda, we're going to do an overview of the Measure W, Home Together, Essential Services, and Prudent Reserves. This is our Measure W spending plan. We are also going to have an opportunity to hear from a number of community voices, and then we'll have audience questions. Next. So firstly, I want to congratulate everyone who was part of the amazing victory of Measure W. We have allocated at least $1.4 billion towards housing and homelessness solutions. So give yourselves a big round of applause, a pat on the back for helping to make this historic investment happen. And just for a little bit of context, in FY fiscal year 23-24, Alameda County invested about $220 million in homelessness, and only $21.5 million of that came from local county sources. The rest came from state and federal funds, many of which are now at risk. So we all know there's a critical need for local and reliable funds to address homelessness, and Measure W represents a critical infusion of local sustained investment for housing and homelessness solutions. And at the same time, under the current federal administration, we know there's a critical need for safety net services to respond to federal policies and budget cuts, as well as impacts from the state. Next slide. So as all of you know, we had record levels of community participation and advocacy. I really want to appreciate the community members, advocates, unhoused leaders and residents, service providers, and everyone who participated in our July 22nd and 30th board meeting, as well as who engaged with all of the board members leading up to those board meetings. We heard from you during the board meetings. We received your emails. You all participated in 2 of our town halls, and we haven't seen this level of engagement in a very long time. I also wanted to acknowledge that the Board of Supervisors and our meetings need to be more accessible. It was frustrating for me, as well as many of you, that there were many of you who were not able to speak at one or both of our meetings. And so I want you to know that your engagement, your feedback is really important. And we are going to make sure that we improve our protocols at the board meeting so that there can be more time for digesting and receiving in advance important information, as well as hearing from everyone who has something to share with us. So this town hall is just one example of how we are hoping to continue addressing transparency and communication, in addition to making sure that your feedback goes through me and to our board as we update our processes. Next slide. So the board was able to approve on July 30th a series of guiding principles for Measure W. You'll see them here. Equity at the center, advancing Vision 2036 and our countywide plans. First and foremost is Home Together, our homelessness plan, investing in what works, reducing silos and leveraging existing infrastructure, results-based accountability and transparency, leveraging every dollar, and fiscal stewardship. Next slide. So I know this is a lot of information. Again, we will share these slides with everyone, but I did want to lift up just a couple principles that I think are really important to keep front and center. The first one is around equity. So you'll see here, this includes putting communities most affected by homelessness, poverty, and structural inequity first, using an equity lens and funding decisions to close racial, economic, and geographic gaps. This is a county-wide investment, so we want to make sure everyone in the county who is impacted by homelessness has an opportunity to be served and housed. We also want to ensure affected community members are at the table from planning through accountability, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. In terms of investing in what works, I wanted to lift up funding strategies backed by data, proven programs, or strong theories of change. And then in terms of accountability and transparency, this came up a lot through our town halls, as well as through our board meetings and our engagement with all of you. We want to make sure that we are setting clear goals and performance metrics for contracts. And again, making sure there's transparency and accountability throughout the spending of Measure W so that the results are very impactful. Next slide. So here's an overview of our Measure W spending plan. So as background, again, Measure W is expected to bring in $1.8 billion over the course of the 10 years the sales tax will be in effect. To date, $810 million has been collected. And each year over the next 6 years, we're anticipating collecting $170 million. And again, the board voted to spend Measure W funds in 3 categories: Home Together for homelessness solutions, essential county services, and a prudent reserve. In terms of the Home Together fund, again, the board committed 80% towards homelessness solutions. And that is incredibly significant. I know some of us were advocating for more. However, I think we landed in a really good place to get to a significant investment. And one of the things I'm really proud of is that we also made a commitment at my request that if we raise more than the projected $170 million in any given year, the amount over that will go towards Home Together or homelessness. And based on what we've been collecting, that could mean an additional $120 million to homelessness, getting the total up to $1.5 billion over the course of 10 years. And that's actually what the voters were talked about in terms of the campaign that happened in 2020. I wanted to share that the Essential County Services Fund, that is 20% of the uncommitted revenue. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And then the prudent reserve is $170 million. That's a one-time reserve, and that amount comes from the estimated amount that we are going to be raising each year. There are a couple things that did not get funded on July 30th that I do want to mention. People may remember that the board supported, including in the proposed board letter on the 30th, a $15 million affordable housing stabilization fund for nonprofit affordable housing providers. And this funding is critical to stabilize, again, nonprofits that play a critical role in the county's homelessness ecosystem. These are nonprofits that have 400 or more units of affordable housing. This is going to come back in the fall, and this proposal is something that I support. Secondly, on July 30th, as well as the prior meeting, the East Bay Rental Housing Association and landlords were advocating for $125 million to repay private landlords for past losses. This was opposed by tenant and homeless advocates. Thank you for the letter that you sent to the board. I also oppose this proposal. And I do want to note that the county has already invested in programs to support small, low-income property owners facing foreclosure, as well as those who suffered losses during the eviction moratorium. So for those of you who are curious about those couple proposals, that's what happened. Next slide. So we'll go over the three buckets of spending. The prudent reserve you'll see here is again $170 million. This is to help stabilize Measure W spending during economic downturns or years where the revenue is below the $170 million projected each year. It will be administered by our county administrator's office. And my office's priority is to ensure that the reserves have clear guidelines. So they're used in the same proportions as the allocation, 80% towards homelessness, 20% towards safety net services, essential services. Secondly, that these funds are invested in the community, meaning that the reserves will sunset. We will actually use all of the funds within, a short amount of time after the tax sunsets so that we are getting that money into the community. And then third, that there's transparency and accountability. We want to make sure not only that we have guidelines, but that the board approves any allocations and there are reports that are available to the public. Next slide. So for the Essential Services Fund, this was shared during our board meeting. So the 20% allocation is $258 million. On the 30th, we already allocated $6.5 million for food security as well as senior services. These funds are going to be administered by the corresponding county agency. So it may be social services, our health agency, for example, and the eligible investments you will see right here. So addressing impacts due to federal and state policy and budget decisions, food security, older adults and senior services, the unincorporated areas of our county, affordable housing on county properties, as well as critical county infrastructure. And again, this is going to come back to the board to further clarify. I had a concern to make sure that critical county infrastructure didn't mean anything, but it was really tied to delivering our essential services. Next slide. So the second bucket of funding is our Essential County Services Fund. So our priorities include making sure that, again, we're supporting the critical safety net services that are being impacted by our federal as well as our state budget and policies. So in terms of healthcare access, I want to make sure we're supporting community clinics and public hospitals, especially those impacted by Medi-Cal cuts. We want to support food security, including mitigating the reductions to CalFresh and supporting food access for everyone who needs it. In terms of mental health, we want to bolster prevention as well as early intervention programs and community services that are impacted by Prop 1 from the state, for example. And then we want to support vulnerable populations. This includes our immigrant community, who we all know are being impacted by raids, detentions, deportations, and the fear of those things happening. It also includes our LGBTQ community and our seniors. And then in addition, I know that many of you have advocated for a program called LIHEAP, the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program. It's a federally funded program that really is important for seniors to be able to stay housed, to have security around their utilities. That is a program that the board has expressed interest in and which we hope to fund through this particular part of Measure W. And then next we're going to go, next slide. We're going to go through our Home Together Fund. So this is again is 80% of the Measure W spending. So Home Together, as hopefully most of you know by now, is our county homelessness plan that we want Measure W to invest in so that we can implement that plan. It includes homelessness prevention, shelter, permanent housing, access, and coordination. And you'll see on this slide some examples for what all of that means. We'll go a little bit deeper with our staff shortly. I do want to clarify that Measure W isn't a new homeless program or department. Rather, it's a funding source to help the county implement our Home Together homelessness plan. And Measure W is going to sustain existing homeless services as well as create new homelessness services. And that's really important. Our staff is doing a great job analyzing together with city staff what we need to make sure that we can sustain, because Alameda County, as well as our cities, are facing both federal and state cuts to homelessness programs. So it's really important that we continue to look at, emergency housing vouchers, shelter beds, outreach programs, and work together to make sure we can both maintain and improve existing programs as well as create new ones. And then, of course, just knowing what's happening in our county, in our cities, and as we read the newspaper, we also know that we urgently need to stand up dignified shelter to house people as more and more cities are clearing encampments. So there's a lot of urgency to doing all of this and doing it in a smart and accountable way. Next slide. So in terms of my priorities for myself and my office, this has really been shaped by the input that we've heard from all of you through our town halls, our meetings, comments we've received through email, etc. So firstly, we want to invest in housing for those with the greatest barriers. And many of you have been advocating already. This includes seniors, families, people with disabilities, the LGBTQ plus community, transitional aged youth, formerly incarcerated people, those with mental and behavioral health needs, and those impacted by gender-based violence. These are the communities we hope that new shelter beds and new housing will be serving. Secondly, we want to strengthen the homelessness system. So we heard loud and clear from all of you that we need accountability and transparency. These funds need to deliver results. We also want to improve the care experience for people who engage in our homelessness system. So one concrete example of that we heard is revisiting our grievance process. Sorry, I need to get my light back on in my office. Revisiting our grievance policy so that if anyone has an issue with the county, one of our service providers, for example, it's clear how they can make that grievance, and there'll be a response in terms of being responsive to addressing that need. In addition to that, we want to create shelter and outreach standards and hold providers accountable. This is something we also heard loud and clear, making sure that there are standards for how we provide services and for the programs that we are supporting. And then we also want to make sure that we're reducing the administrative burden to providers. Simplifying, streamlining administration, funding, contracting to make it easier. We want our providers to spend less time and money on administration and more time on serving our unhoused community. We also heard loud and clear, and this one I'm very committed to, making sure that we engage people with lived experience in homelessness. We want to strengthen our response system. We want the participation to be more than looking back at how we spent the funds. We want people engaged in how will we use the funds. And then lastly, creating a regional approach to encampment resolution that centers human rights and public health. This one is really important. We want to prioritize housing. We want to prioritize basic needs and public health. And this means using these funds to expand shelter options and safe parking, as well as making sure that there's sufficient outreach as well as noticing, and that we're treating people's belongings as such with the care and dignity we would treat our own belongings. There's a lot more we can answer as we get questions from you. But right now, I want to transition to inviting Jonathan Russell, who leads our Housing and Homelessness Department under our healthcare agency, to share a little bit more about the implementation of Measure W. So let's go to the next slide. Jonathan, thank you so much for engaging not just with my office, but with all of our offices and so many community members, as well as for the time and attention you and your team are putting into the plan for Measure W, as well as now the implementation. And I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Supervisor. Good to be with you all and really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you, Supervisor, for how intentional you have been in having these town hall spaces and your priorities, which we are so excited about within Housing and Homelessness Services, as they really do align with so much of what we're doing in our Home Together plan. So briefly, shifting to look at the Home Together Fund from an implementation perspective, first and foremost, and this is really the forefront of many of our local jurisdictions' mind, and certainly ours, is how are we going to equitably distribute these investments in programs and services? So we are going to be allocating the funds and services across our 5 county regions in close partnership with our local jurisdictions to support the increased impacts and coordination. So when I say 5 regions, of course, we have well more than that on the city side, but you can see on the right here, we've broken up those regions into groups of cities. North County, Oakland, and Piedmont are their own region, Mid-County, South County, and East County. So that really is the vision. In many ways, we want to be oriented towards a proportionate investment. And what that means is we're using a really data-driven and equity-based methodology. So it's not just about what is the population of the overall county, for example, where Oakland, as just one example, is just 26% of the overall county population, but really using the data-driven methodology of who is homeless and where, which is where we see the significant equities, where, for example, Oakland unto themselves represents 58% of the homeless population. So we will be using that methodology to regionally prioritize funding in those different areas. That breaks down to just quickly 10% of the point in time count population of those experiencing homelessness are in North County, 58% in Oakland, 16% in Mid County, 11% in South County, and 5% in East County. As I mentioned, at the center of all of this is really an intention to center racial equity. We know, for example, that Black and Indigenous people in Alameda County are 4 times overrepresented in the homeless population as compared to the general population, and that those truly deep drivers of structural racism are at the root of what causes homelessness, and therefore all of our program needs to be oriented toward what can best address those structural drivers and how can we develop and design programs that meet the needs of those who have the biggest barriers and face the most structural impediments to being housed. Excitedly, one of the things that Alameda County, in partnership with Oakland and many of our jurisdictions, has done is developed a lot of robust data and research starting more than 5 years ago with our Centering Racial Equity report to really dive into our data of where the system is performing well and where it needs to improve. And so we're looking closely at those measures as we continue to utilize the Home Together Fund to further that work. And then lastly, close coordination. We know that the county is not the only local jurisdiction involved in this work. So we are in close coordination and collaboration with our city partners, where we will really continue to work through a lot of existing spaces to improve and optimize our relationships. Because we know that the work we do in the community is as good as the coordination we're able to do with jurisdictions to lower the barriers, to reduce the burden, and to make our system less confusing. So we have some existing spaces, our city and county technical working group, where we face a lot of this, ongoing all city meetings, the hundreds of participants that are involved in our continuum of care, and then our Home Together planning working groups, because we're in the process of refreshing our Home Together plan, as many of you all are aware right now. Next slide. Shifting more specifically to the community engagement opportunities. As I just mentioned, we are excited that our Home Together plan that we currently have was born of and developed from a ton of existing community engagement, which we are excited to continue and expand as we look at this expansion of resources through the Home Together Fund. In a lot of ways, as we mentioned, this is not an opportunity where we're launching a new program or starting from scratch. We are really seeking to build on many of our existing spaces. Some of those are through our existing Community Consumer Advisory Board, known as our CAB, through the Healthcare for the Homeless program that really is focused on our federally qualified health clinic and lifting up and having deep impact from the consumers and folks that access the system. Our countywide youth advisory board that is working to empower youth to participate and provide direction and insight into how best to address youth homelessness. And then the variety of our 8 to 10 continuum of care committees and work groups on the Home Together plan, all of which have robust representation with folks with lived experience. But as we know, those are very focused spaces with ongoing time commitments and all voluntary. So we're excited to continue to think through these discussions, ways that we can expand that engagement, ways we can deepen that engagement. And so there will be more opportunities we're excited to bring forward in the near term. We're going to be having some specific forums coming in the early fall, where we'll be having broad, open community spaces really centered on creating open forums to both discuss the state of the system, to talk through what we know about the federal impacts and the local landscape, and then really have a focused approach to engaging and hearing candidly as we begin this process to finalize our updated plan to share out and get feedback from you all on that. So look forward to more coming as to those opportunities in the coming weeks and months. And then lastly, I think I have one more slide. Briefly looking at what will the implementation process be in terms of funding and all the county mechanisms and processes. Again, thinking about the Home Together Fund, we always want to talk about it as that subset of Measure W funding for homelessness in light of our overall Home Together plan. We have a roadmap that's data-driven, focused on equity, and really oriented toward implementing those goals. And so the funding is going to be administered through H&H, the office that I oversee, working very closely with our partners at the city and other county departments. It won't be given directly to regions, but really directly to projects. So we are seeking to streamline and optimize the way that providers and communities that would receive this funding receive it, which is directly from the county in close coordination with our local partners to really drive those impacts with an orientation toward equity and accountability and outcomes. To do that, that really involves the need to have concrete project ideas that are oriented toward our plan, that are informed by data and really centered on meeting people's needs. So that will be our priority as we seek to expand investments in those 4 areas that Supervisor Fortunato Bas mentioned earlier: homelessness prevention, shelter and interim housing, permanent housing, and then also the overall access and coordination of our system. So that includes capacity building resources to expand our engagement with folks with lived experience, to build capacity among our providers, and to always be focused on broadening access and lowering barriers in our system. With that, I wanted to share a little bit about some funding opportunities that are ongoing or actually have launched in the near term as we are planning for the significant expansion of infrastructure that the county, that H&H needs to build to operationalize all of the funding in the forthcoming 8 years. That's also worth mentioning. While there are about 6 years less of revenue to be accrued, in order to be prudent and also really maximize our impacts over the long term, because we know that's what ends homelessness, is housing support that can endure over time. Our plan is to implement the funding and spend it over a course of 8 years. So that timeline will exceed when the revenue measure, the current measure, ends. We've launched an initial RFI, that is a request for information, to explain our county acronyms that I know we all love and can be really confusing. We released a request for information to expand interim housing up to potentially another 250 beds. That goal was to really quickly create low barrier, evidence-based, human-centered expansions of interim housing. We're excited to have proposals from all regions in the 5 counties with an interest in creating more than 600 new beds. So we're combing through those now and should in the near future have some direction to those folks that have submitted. We're really focusing on how we can have a regional apportioning of those, and admittedly also really focusing, as the supervisor mentioned, on a lot of gaps and the need to enhance and stabilize our current shelter system. So that was drawn directly from our list of approved vendor pools, and that's just the first tidbit, the first opportunity, of which there'll be many more resources coming online. A second that is in the planning process is not so much an ongoing resource as the interim housing and the operations and the services and the housing subsidies that we'll be bringing online in the coming years, but a one-time upfront resource of capital targeted to creating a flexible pool of funding so that we can preserve and enhance and expand our existing and potentially new interim and permanent housing for folks experiencing homelessness. So that will be coming in the coming months. We're doing that jointly with our Housing and Community Development Department. There'll be a variety of eligible project types, be those interim shelters, be those projects that will start interim and convert to permanent, gap financing for permanent supportive housing and other units for folks experiencing homelessness. So stay tuned for more information on that. And I believe I will pass it back to the supervisor now.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Really appreciate all of that information, and thanks again to you and your team as you're working very hard to implement Measure W so we can house more people. At this point, we want to welcome some additional community voices who've been really engaged in homelessness and housing solutions. And I want to introduce our policy analyst, our senior policy analyst, Agnes Cho, to lead this section. Thank you, Agnes.
Thank you, Supervisor, and hello, everyone. I think we can stop sharing the screen. So like the Supervisor said, one of our priorities for our office is to really take into account community input and hear directly from the experts that we have in the community, specifically folks with lived experience of homelessness. And to that end, we have this portion will be kind of like public comments, where we've invited several community leaders, including many of whom have lived experience of homelessness, to give 2 minutes of public comment to share their priorities. So first up, we have Tiny with Poor Magazine, kind of representing the homefulness and of the poor community. So Tiny, you have 2 minutes starting now.
Okay, go ahead, dear.
We are just a few of the 25 houseless youth, adults, and elders and ancestors who are now hopeful in rent-free forever housing, healing housing at Hopefulness and Poe Magazine.
Hopefulness is a homeless people's solution to homelessness, built with permission, prayer, and protocol from the Ohlone Lishan Nation, the first peoples of this land, and we are currently urgently trying to raise money to build a second Hopefulness project in East Oakland.
In addition to housing and healing, we support fellow houseless people with street-based outreach, food, media, resources, and reparations every day. This is the template of Hopefulness, radically redistributing always.
On October 23rd, we will be legally codifying the concept of unselling this small part of Mama Earth at the recorder's office at 1:30 p.m. We hope you all come because Mama Earth is not for sale.
We believe that housing solution for houseless people needs to be created and informed by a theory of change we call poverty scholarship.
We teach this theory and practice it at People's Schools Decolonization Degentrification Seminar. The next bi-yearly seminar is this weekend. We hope you all consider enrolling.
That's just some of our relatives, because we don't operate in the I, we're all the we. We believe that solutions need to be built with guidance from us as poor and houseless people. Communities like Hopefulness and Wood Street Commons are poverty scholars.
Otherwise, we have tragic, harmful, unsustainable projects created about us, without us, like the cabins of Wood Street.
Yeah.
So in addition, as you go forward with Measure W, implementation, Why is all this talk about Measure W and no talk about the end of sweeps? Why is there even a new encampment management policy which will create more trauma and grief in our communities? What we as swept and criminalized houseless people are demanding is give surplus city land to houseless people so we can immediately build our own solutions and immediately stop sweeping us. We're not trash. And no matter how many times you sweep me, it doesn't give my houseless family a home. Please stop making new laws to incarcerate and criminalize and disappear every poor person we get, what we see on stolen land. Finally, please use some of the Measure W funds to reopen the closed family shelters in Berkeley. We have no place to go, and I want to lift up Sister Omawali as one of our residents here and relatives. We are houseless people who are demanding, listen to us. Stop making more about us without us solutions. Thank you. Oh, okay.
Thank you so much, Tiny and the Poor family. We really appreciate your comments. Next up, we have Joanna Holden with the LGBTQ Center.
I mean, I kind of wanted to hear Tiny talk for a little bit longer. I see you, sibling. Thank you for what you do. I am Joanna Holden, She Goddess, Development Director at the Oakland LGBTQ Center on behalf of Oakland's LGBTQ community. I'm going to share my screen a little bit because we have some receipts from Alameda County herself about what is going on in our community. So in November, our health department presented, I'm hoping y'all can see this, about LGBTQ community health. And one thing that we are seeing here in Oakland is that we make up a large percentage of this community. About 14% of adults in Alameda County and 18% of our young people are LGBTQ. And we're seeing disproportionate rates of poverty. We are seeing wildly disparate rates in terms of housing security amongst our youth. California doesn't even collect data about trans people, but we're seeing more than about double the rates of housing insecurity amongst queer youth. In the United States, it's 10 times amongst trans youth. And contrary to the lies that you are being sold by this federal government, physical violence and sexual violence experienced by queer and trans people is wildly disproportionate compared to the general population. So what we need to do is propose real solutions led by the community that are keeping people in their homes, because what we are seeing is that the Department of Housing and Urban Development is condoning discrimination against queer, trans, and gender nonconforming people in shelters. During the pandemic, our center raised $500,000 on our own from local philanthropy and kept over 500 people housed and safe. We're proposing to leverage Measure W funds to do the same thing again, keeping over 2,000 of our community members safely housed. We'll also include a local clinic, our Glenbrook Wellness Clinic, to support that community. And we will support STI prevention, HIV services, gender affirming care. And we'll do that while being responsible stewards of the taxpayer dollars, because this community is in all our communities, and it is often the glue that holds our communities together. Thank you for standing up for queer people and for supporting homegrown solutions for the people.
Thank you so much, Joanna, and thank you for that presentation. And you did a lot in your 2 minutes. I think this is something that we can look into for both that applies to both the Home Together Fund as well as the Essential County Services Fund. Appreciate you taking the time to present today. Next up, we have Ms. Margaret Gordon, an environmental justice advocate and fellow with the Just Cities Institute.
Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for the ability to speak. There are a couple things that I really like to add to the conversation that needs to be a thread. And all of the process is that we need to have more language about human rights and decriminalization. And I would like to make sure that we have an ongoing education orientation to the people who have homes and the unhoused, so they can understand that there is a process that wants to be more in line with the understanding that they have a human right and not to be criminalized because you are homeless. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miss Margaret. And next up, we have Dominique Walker, one of the founders of Moms for Housing and a member of the Berkeley Rent Board.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dominique Walker. I'm here tonight representing Moms for Housing. I'm also the vice chair of the Berkeley Rent Board. More importantly, I'm a mother. I'm a tenant. I'm someone who is formerly unhoused. I want to begin by thanking Supervisor Bas for hosting this town hall and for inviting the folks who need to be centered to hear their voices. So I want to appreciate you for that. Moms for Housing has always believed 100% of those funds should be used for homelessness, housing, homelessness services, community services, folks that are building affordable housing community members. Moms for Housing actually has a land trust, and I know a lot of formerly houseless folks that are a part of organizations are using different mechanisms to obtain land and put it in a trust and make it permanently affordable. And I think that this needs to be something that is talked about, and this is something that Moms for Housing is pushing for. We support the Home Together plan, and I would just like to highlight that this is a man-made crisis driven by capitalism, poor policy decisions that have led us here, and we have a chance to make right what was wrong. We can put a dent in this right now if we act. So appreciate everybody's time and solidarity with all oppressed people. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominique. Appreciate you lifting up all of these other solutions. Next up, we have John Janosco, a community leader and organizer with Wood Street Commons. John, you can share your video. You have 2 minutes.
There we go. Oh, sorry about that. So good evening, everybody, and thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. I'm representing the unhoused community out there. I just wanted to say it's great that lived experience is at the table now. It's great that lived experience is able to speak on their own behalf now. It's great that lived experience is being listened to and heard. It's great that lived experience solutions are being conceptualized and really considered. It's great that lived experience is part of the leading the community into a more humane space. But I just want to remind everyone on this call that most of the unhoused community living on the streets really doesn't have a say-so or much of a say-so in the decisions made by local, state, and federal government about their fate, meaning where they will end up tomorrow. It is up to us, the people on this call, to make decisions in the best interest of the most affected by those decisions. We're superheroes right now. I want to also really stress the importance of this. All of this that we talk about is great, but if there's no action behind it, the sense of urgency out there on the street is so dire. I visit my community on a regular basis, and just a couple of days ago, a friend of mine lost his RV. His RV is his home, and it was dragged away in front of him while he stood there with 2 suitcases and his cat. We have to make sure that what we're doing, there's a sense of urgency in all these conversations that we're having, these meetings and stuff. When we get off these calls, we have to find ways to speed up the process of allocating the funding to the right places. We have to make sure that there's oversight on the spending of that funding. We have to make sure that there's change in the way that things are being done with Measure W funding. we have to make sure that we're using that money to create a foundation, a stable foundation for the most vulnerable of our community. You know, my dad used to say we're only as strong as our weakest link, and right now our weakest link is our unhoused community. So unless we can stabilize that community and give them a chance to be a part of this future of the Bay Area, it means nothing. The money means nothing. I'm sorry, but being honest, leading up to this day to speak on this panel and stuff, I feel like my stomach has been in knots. And since for me, it is so important to be able to be on point and say the right thing and not say things that might, just offend people, to not want to listen to my unhoused voice because I'm representing so many people right now. And so I'm saying this because my stomach is in knots, because I just want to make sure that the message is clear that we have to act now. We don't have time to wait. People are losing their homes. People are losing their lives right now. And so we can't still continue to have conversations without action behind it. I know my minutes are coming close to an end, but I just want to let people know I try to speak from the heart, try to be real about this situation, and just want to make sure that I'm a helpful voice in all of this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sean. And your stomach was in knots, but that was still a very powerful comment that you gave about the critical need to act with urgency. Really
Thank you.
appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Renee Hayes with St. Mary's Center.
Hello, everyone. My name is Renee Hayes, and I'm here representing St. Mary's with the Committee for Hope and Justice, and there are 10 of us online right now in this call. I currently live in transitional housing at St. Mary's, so I've been very involved in this Measure W and some of the other bonds that we were trying to work towards. And this is my third time participating in Representative Bas's town hall. So I'm here because as someone who is currently living in transitional housing, one of the things that I always talked about in our group is that prevention would have been some kind of safety net for prevention would have helped me not become unhoused. And now that I am in transitional housing, that is something I'm very grateful for here at St. Mary's, but at the same time, I need permanent housing. So that's a whole nother process. And so the priorities we think should be helping people not become homeless whenever possible, and then moving them as quickly as possible into something permanent. And what we would like to see also is that we like to be a part of not just the oversight into when money has already been spent, but we like to be part of the planning on how it's to be spent and what kind of services are being provided, because we think you need the voices of people who live the experience. And no two people live it the same way. So one voice isn't going to be enough. So you're going to need more than one voice from different communities. But we especially want to see some representation on how things are being planned from seniors' point of view, because seniors are the fastest growing group of unhoused people in Alameda County, especially in Oakland. So we just like to have formal participation in decision making. And we like to, St. Mary's, the seniors at St. Mary's will always show up strong. We're gonna try to make sure that seniors are represented and in a way that it's not, that you understand it's not one size fit all, because we have different seniors with different needs. And so they're going to need to be supportive services to meet those needs, because you have to look at the root cause and come up with a solution in that sense. I don't know how much time I have left. Is there a clock?
On my phone down here. Thank you, Renee. That was great. Really appreciate you uplifting kind of the need to prioritize seniors and create meaningful real representation and participation from people with lived experience. So thank you for your time tonight.
Okay, thanks.
Next up, we have Viviana Nance with the Care for Communities Coalition.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Viviana, and I'm an organizer on staff with Care for Community Action. Above all things, what Oakland truly needs is housing. Real, deeply affordable, and permanently supportive housing where people can actually live and thrive. Speaking from experience, I know just how hard it is to keep working and serving my community while facing housing instability. There were times I was, of course, moving shelter to shelter, hotel to hotel, not knowing where I'd rest my head at night, and it was such an exhausting and destabilizing experience. And I can't tell you just how much harder it would have been to keep doing the work I do without eventually having a place to live. And within my role here at C4C for over a year now, I've been out on the doors every week, door knocking and speaking directly with thousands of Oakland residents. And over, the number one concern I hear is housing. People are very clear that we need truly more affordable homes, and we need real pathways to get our neighbors off the streets and into stability. Now, I understand and appreciate the services and programs are important, but they truly will not work without the foundation of housing. And that's why I want to urge that the Board of Supervisors deeply prioritize affordable housing and permanently supportive housing first and foremost. Because again, without housing, nothing else will hold. Thank you.
Thank you, Viviana. And last but not least, we have Kari Malki with Restore Oakland.
Hey y'all, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much. I'm so grateful to be on this panel with these brilliant voices, and so grateful to Supervisor Fortunato Bas's office for involving community as much as possible. My name is Kari. I'm a community organizer and a Healing Justice Program Manager with Restore Oakland. I'm also a member of the county's Mental Health Advisory Board's Care First Jails Last Task Force. And so I'm speaking today on behalf of all those things, as well as the Care First Community Coalition. And I'm speaking on behalf of the folks that are in this Care First Jails Last population, as the county calls it, by which we mean folks who have been directly impacted by the criminal legal system and who have serious mental health or substance use needs. So that's a category of folks that is larger than any county would want it to be. We have so many folks that are in dire need of not only supportive services, but also just their basic freedom and human rights after having contact with the criminal legal system. And as anyone who has been to jail or prison or supported their loved ones through that system knows, the system is deeply traumatizing. So even if you went in without behavioral health issues, it's very likely that you'll come out on the other side with them. And so we know that for folks that have serious mental health issues and substance use problems that are looking for stability, housing is the first thing that anyone needs. And housing is extremely difficult to come by when you have a criminal record. It's also difficult to come by when you are extremely low income, right? Which so many people coming out of the legal system are because of the victimization and the discrimination that they face. So I'm really here to uplift the need to use Measure W to address the urgent unmet needs of formerly incarcerated folks and folks in the court diversion system who are dealing with serious mental health and behavioral health concerns, which looks like, as the homies throughout this whole panel have said, this means investing in deeply affordable permanent housing solutions, not just focusing on shelter and interim housing. It includes permanent supportive housing and board and cares for our county's most low income and disabled residents. And it really means that we cannot be affording to use our county's money to engage in sweeps, ineffective and violent policies that actually just create more trauma, instability, and violence for our unhoused and precariously housed neighbors. And so I really want to say that from all of the crises that my loved ones and I and the folks that I've worked with in community organizing have gone through, the most important thing that would have kept us all safe is housing. And so if that can be affordable, if that can be safe, if that can be permanent, I know that our whole county will be so much safer and so much healthier. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Kari, and thank you to everyone who shared their time tonight to both participate in giving a comment and to participate in this webinar. Now, before we move on to the Q&A section, I want to just invite back Supervisor Fortunato Bas and Jonathan to share kind of any comments and to respond to kind of to what we heard from these community leaders.
Thank you, Agnes, and thank you to my entire staff team for not only organizing this town hall, but the others, as well as all the ongoing work that my team does to support our office. I do want to thank Tiny, Homefulness, Johanna, Miss Margaret, Dominique, John, Renee, Viviana, and Kari for all of those comments. I want to make sure that my 4 other colleagues on the board see that half hour of really powerful comment that you shared, because it's really important that we get this right in terms of how we use these funds to address homelessness and housing in particular, and that we center your experience. So Agnes is gonna ask us a number of questions, so we'll be able to go deep. But I did want to share a couple specific things. For Tiny and the Homefulness folks who talked about reopening the closed family shelter in Berkeley, I just wanted to share, if you could reconnect with my office to share more information, I'd appreciate that. I do want to note in Berkeley, we do have Mayor Ishii's staff person on this call, as well as staff from council members Luna Parra and council member Trey Grubb, and council member O'Keefe is also on the Zoom. So Berkeley is pretty well represented, and I want to find out more about what's happening. So please connect with us afterwards. Let's see. Yeah, there's a lot that was said. I don't want to be repetitive, but I just want to let you all know that I definitely heard you in terms of prevention and housing being the key to preventing homelessness, as well as making sure that we have immediate, urgent interim housing, places where people can be, centering human rights and health. And I'll maybe leave it right there, because I know that Agnes has a bunch of questions that we can answer to have more conversation, but wanted to thank all of you who spoke and let you know that you were heard. And I do want to make sure my colleagues on the board get a chance to hear you.
So thank you. We've been answering questions in the Q&A chat. If you have additional questions, please put them in there, and we're going to try our best to answer them kind of in the chat. And we'll be asking them of the supervisor and of Jonathan. But to kick it off, there are many folks who also shared their questions when they registered for the event. And we can start it off with questions that we received in that registration form. Oh, one of the things that people are curious about is how Measure W funds can go towards supporting vulnerable populations and really high priority communities, including children, families, people with mental health needs, and kind of like what we heard from the speakers, people who are exiting the criminal legal system, seniors, so forth. Supervisor Jonathan.
Sure, I'd be happy to weigh in on that critical question. This is a huge priority for us. I'll share one example of the level of need that strikes me as such an important part of what it means to prioritize folks with needs. So as many folks are familiar on this call, like any system that invariably has to have a bureaucratic infrastructure to assess and equitably distribute resources, our current coordinated entry system has a housing needs assessment. And for folks that score high based on a lot of vulnerabilities, those folks go on our housing queue. So we can imagine this a list of just 4,000 of the thousands of folks that need housing every year. And those folks really represent the people that are most highly prioritized based on that assessment. Of that current list of about 4,000, 86% of those on that list report needs for support with severe mental illness or substance use or both. So in many ways, as Kari said so well, providing housing that is prioritized for those folks is providing that relief. Because we know that what housing first means is that housing isn't the only thing that's relevant, but dignified housing creates a space where everything else can safely become relevant and folks can be in community and receive support voluntarily. So just really wanted to lift up that big priority for us is leveraging Measure W, not just to create more housing, but to diversify the resources we have in our housing. So having permanent supportive housing and other types of housing sites that are targeted to support the unique needs of certain populations. Working very closely with our behavioral health department as more resources come online through the Proposition 1 changes, to create broader types of interim housing that are specifically designed to support folks with behavioral health needs and really diversify our resources in that way. So that's a huge priority. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that very often what we see is that the drivers of homelessness are the loss of housing that often causes and exacerbates those needs for those services. So at the same time, if we can do those prevention resources, we can prevent folks from having those escalating needs too. So in some ways, that's really targeting the services from both ends and prioritizing those with the most needs and the most barriers with an equity lens.
Thanks, Jonathan. I think I might just add that we also want to be in conversation with people with lived experience, with our service providers, with the broader community about land that we can use, buildings we can use, projects that we can stand up. As I understand it, there's one project that replied to the requests for interests that would serve transitional age youth and those who've been impacted by gender-based violence. That could be upwards of 90 beds and rooms, and that is incredibly important. I think we want to be in conversation to lift up those opportunities and those projects and make sure that especially you all are reaching out to the supervisor and the council members in the districts where we can stand up these programs. And I also wanted to lift up, I know there's a number of folks in addition to John from Wood Street, from the Village, from a collective of organizations with Miss Margaret that are really looking at how to put together something that would be sort of a sanctuary community. I want to have more opportunities to hear what those projects could be and, just really figure out what are the parcels of land we can use, who are the service providers who are trusted that we can partner with. And as we have these opportunities, I transitioned from being a council member to a supervisor. It's going to be really important to make sure that you're also talking with the local elected leadership in the city where these projects would be. So if you're in Hayward or in Oakland or any other city, make sure you're also talking with the mayor and the council members of the area where you want to stand up this project, because that political support will also be important as we look at the opportunities that come in front of us.
Thank you, Supervisor. Thank you, Jonathan. One of the themes that we heard in the public comments is how important representation, true representation is from people with lived experience of homelessness. So Jonathan, can you just share more about the mechanisms that unhoused residents, unhoused leaders, and people who are formerly unhoused will have to get a seat at the table in the design and implementation of Measure W?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for the question. And I know we've had some robust discussion of that so far. In many ways, as I mentioned, there are some existing tables, and I'm happy. I'd be happy to share. We should have an initial Measure W frequently asked questions and fact sheet in the next several days that I will certainly be sharing with you, Agnes, and the supervisor. It'd be great to distribute to this group too, because some of what we'll have there is some of these initial bullet point answers, but also some links to some of those existing spaces I already mentioned. But also want to hasten to add that our system, as many folks, I remember John and I have had conversations about this. Our system is exceedingly complex, right? And that is, we need to own that we made it that way, right? Through the ticky-tacky way of the amount of funding, and services, funding for services that come into our community makes it exceedingly complex because they often have various different strings attached, right? Various different criteria for who's eligible. And what that has meant is it is often, to be frank, super hard to engage our system in a way that it makes sense without sometimes feeling like you need a graduate degree in homeless service acronyms to talk about it. So I just want to recognize the way structurally, even with our existing spaces, that really has become a barrier. And it requires this level of involvement and sort of unofficial, labor-intensive, unpaid education to really understand some of it. So just naming that, I think we are committed to the ways that we can overcome that. We have an internal group of folks in H&H that are really our leadership in our different spaces, some of our most forward-facing, front-facing spaces, leadership from our Healthcare for the Homeless team and our System Access and Equity team that are really putting our heads together right now as to how we can leverage these resources to transform the way that engagement happens. So I want to share again some of those existing spaces, the continuum of care, our advisory boards that are focused on really key subsets of our system of care. But these additional forums we'll be having in the near future are really intended to open up and get space for more feedback as to how that continued engagement can be deepened and broadened. We're balancing the reality with, as a lot of folks on our continuum of care were in my ear saying just a couple of days ago, hey, we know what works. We've run the data. We've done community engagement. So let's go and push play on these things. We do think that's true, right? We don't want to hold up our processes to sort of collectively ask again what we need to do to end homelessness, but we want to deepen that engagement so we can really think about implementing the Home Together plan priorities and services in ways that can be innovative and really can engage folks more directly in that process. So I have just so appreciated many of the folks I've talked to, the projects that we've seen come forward, that folks have lifted up, and just really encourage folks to stay tuned. We'll pass out that contact information, Agnes, for when those targeted spaces happen. And full disclosure to many of the folks on the call, that were the community voices, you're the folks that I'm going to be chatting with about hosting some of these targeted spaces collaboratively with your community. So.
Thank you, Jonathan. Really great to hear that.
Thank you, Jonathan. We'll definitely make sure to get that information out to everyone who both registered and is participating in this webinar and kind of our broader community. We also received a lot of questions around the funding process. I know that you provided kind of a general overview of that funding process, but specifically for organizations that are new to the county contracting and procurement process, kind of how can they stay abreast of these funding opportunities when they become available?
Yeah, absolutely. So as we said, in many ways, there will be new programs and new opportunities to expand services with Measure W funding, as well as Measure W funding flowing into many different quarters of our existing system as we see gaps coming forward. So I think the easiest thing to say is get on the mailing list that will be in that contact information that I send out, Agnes, where we'll really be sharing, and stay tuned to our website as some of those initial resources come out. Some of I mentioned earlier, this capital opportunity and otherwise. And full disclosure, those processes, which I certainly don't control, of doing county procurement, of all the complexities that go into that work that really are ultimately designed for accountability, right? So we can know what we're spending on and that we can vet projects. We are seeking to work through those in a way that is expeditious, but also, those are onerous processes. So more to come on that. As I said, some of this has already been released in small scale ways and will continue to be. But the other piece I'd say too is we are eyes wide open around what we are facing down from the federal level. We stand to lose between $70 to $80 million a year of just federal funding across our system for homelessness in the worst case scenario. So we are really having to balance in the next coming weeks and months the reality of the potential gutting of some of those resources and balancing sort of our new work in light of some of that sustaining work. So all of that is going to come out in a variety of opportunities to propose for funding, but that will include funding to preserve some existing resources, funding to enhance operations at our current sites, to really improve them, to deepen them, to lower the barriers, and then also funding for new ones. So there will be procurements to really that kind of cover all those three areas in the coming years. So our website, forthcoming mailing lists, we'll blast all that out.
And Jonathan, can you share a little bit more? Kind of, we've gotten several questions in the chat around kind of this balance between how much of Measure W will go toward sustaining existing services, just given the federal and state budget cuts, and how much of Measure W will actually be for new resources. Can you share how your team is thinking about that and kind of the conversations you're having with cities around this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I wish I had a great, clear, we already know it percentage on those proportions. We are modeling for all the scenarios and really starting with the data, right? What are the needs in our system? What do we see are the greatest inequities, and what do we know works? And trying to work back from that to say, let's look at what currently is working in our system, what federal and state funding currently fund, and what's potentially at risk. So we're working with what we know is that there are certain federal resources that are ending. One of those is about 800 emergency housing vouchers that were released during the pandemic to house folks out of homelessness. And those are ending for our local housing authority. So we're strategically planning with them to see how much of those need to be sustained. But that is about $20+ million a year of subsidies that's ending in the coming months, potentially by January or February, early next year. So between our housing authorities' plans to potentially transition people to other programs, we are planning with them to make sure that that doesn't get dropped. We also know that the next future rounds of HAP funding, which is the state of California's primary funding source for homelessness, the next round that was approved at about 50% of what we currently receive. So we know that's going to get cut in half starting in 2027 and beyond. So we're planning for what we know, but some of those projected amounts, we're really hoping to know in the next several months, whether, the budget, if we don't have a federal government shutdown or gets approved next year, what some of those plans will be like. The last thing I'll say, Agnes, and I know all of this is not sort of giving an exact proportion, is the federal government really might tighten the screws on what we're allowed to spend this funding on, right? They might really gut the housing first priorities, which all of our federally funded programs use right now, require things like mandated treatment or what have you. So while those funds might not go away, they might be required to be used on things that we functionally couldn't use them on because it's not aligned with our priorities and we don't have those resources set up. So it could be 20 to 30% in a good scenario. It could be more like 50 to 60% in the worst of scenarios of the annual funding that would need to sustain versus grow. The last category, I think that's really important on the city side. So I kind of talked about the federal and the state. At the local level, we know a lot of our interim housing and shelter sites that have been amazing projects that have been valiantly stood up by our city partners do have funding cliffs in the coming year to 2 years to 3 years. So we're really working with those city partners to say, how can we jointly prioritize the projects that need to stay open so that we don't have a net reduction in our shelter beds, which could be a real possibility, but balance that with opening new projects. So all of those things are underway, but they're not going to stop us from the investments in the things we know we need to do that are new, while prioritizing keeping the outcomes we've seen going for high performing projects. So the county is going to lean in and fund more. We know that of our existing, and we're still working out what those exact details and proportions will be as the forever shifting landscape around us unfolds.
And there are different federal policies every week to interpret and trying to understand what the implications are. Yeah. So appreciate the work that you and your team are doing. We also have a set of questions, received a set of questions around city policies. We know that the county doesn't operate in a vacuum. One question that folks had was how the county will handle city policies that really that don't follow kind of best practices around responding to homelessness and encampments. Supervisor Fortunato Bas, given the political dimension of this.
Yeah, this is a good question, as well as the comments from For Magazine and Homefulness, you know, and especially as we're seeing President Trump really crack down by you know, coming into Washington, D.C. and having other states come into Washington, D.C. to address homelessness in a way that is potentially very, very inhumane. I think that's sort of the danger under this federal administration. But in regards to city policies, you know, one of the things that we are working to do is be really clear about the role of the cities versus the county around homelessness and encampments. So we are hoping that we'll have more information and fact sheets that we can share across the county to be clear about that role. You know, our cities set policies around responding to encampments. The county sets policy only in terms of the unincorporated area. So that really calls on us to figure out how we work together. And my hope is that with Measure W, with resources that we have never had access to before, that are actually local and less restricted than some of the state and federal funding, that cities will really work with us to create more humane standards. And again, standards that are in line with health and human rights, which means prioritizing housing, as many people have already said, prioritizing basic needs and public health, and really making sure that we're doing things like offering shelter, creating enough time in terms of noticing to help people transition to have their health and other service needs met, and that we're treating people's possessions like we would treat our own possessions, with a lot of care and with transparency. You know, I would say that we have to give Measure W an opportunity to work. And so I know that Councilmember Ken Houston is potentially proposing something in the next couple of weeks in Oakland. I have not seen his policy. I've talked with him briefly. Want to sit down and talk with him to understand what that is. And I know that we also have staff on this call from Mayor Lee, Councilmember Fife, and Councilmember Brown. So thank you to them and any others from Oakland who are here. I think it would be really important to pause and give Measure W and these investments a chance to work, to really focus on identifying land where we can stand up interim shelter projects, as well as getting more housing online as quickly as possible. So all of you know this is also very political in the same way Trump can use his executive powers to do what he's doing in DC. Anything from the board requires 3 votes. Anything from our councils requires majority votes as well. And so I'm going to do what I can to share what we're talking about here as broadly as possible with all of my colleagues. And I know my staff will do the same. And I really encourage everyone to talk to as many as your representatives as possible, because at the end of the day, it requires that political leadership and it requires majority votes to get what I know many people here want in terms of policies and projects that will make a difference to house people.
Thank you, Supervisor. We also received a set of questions around accountability and oversight. So kind of the first kind of part to this question is, what are there any success metrics to this? Jonathan, I know you're a big policy wonk and your eyes just lit up with excitement when you heard the word metrics. So can you share a little bit more about kind of these success metrics? And the second part to this is, what will Measure W kind of oversight look like?
Yeah. Happy to, yeah, jump in with the first part, the metrics. there are metrics. There are metrics for days. If anything, we live and breathe metrics because oftentimes for different funding sources, as shout out to the providers and workers on the call, that sometimes those things unfortunately get passed on to our individual contracts where there's one set of metrics for one program and another for another. The county has a results-based accountability framework where we have very clear metrics by program type. So this is the goals and targets and outreach, for example, for rapid rehousing programs, right? All of those different performance metrics. And so, yes, there's myriad metrics. There's also system-wide metrics. So I would encourage folks to go to the H&H's website, homelessness.ac.gov.org. I go there so often, I can't believe. Hopefully I got that URL right. Check me on that, Agnes. But you can go there and go to our reports page and find the Home Together plan, which we've talked about much on this call. We do comprehensive annual updates that are really looking at system-wide metrics too. So there's program level metrics, which is performance, outcomes, consumer satisfaction, right? Like hearing from people in the programs, permanent housing exits, for example. And then across our system, how many people are entering versus exiting homelessness? How many people are falling back into homelessness, and looking all of that in disaggregated by race and other identity categories to make sure there's not disproportionality. So yes, we've got metrics galore. And I think a lot of what we need to focus on, to be totally candid, is building our bench within the county side to really develop robust community-based resources to help folks achieve those metrics and really to monitor in a way that's supportive to our providers. And lastly, and Measure W will be a great resource for this, we need to fund programs and projects that work, that are effective in a way that is deep enough to allow for good outcomes, right? That is a lot of what we struggle with in the homelessness space, is providers and communities getting thrown around for underperformance when very often there are shoestring budgets, unsure of what's going to be funded next year. So I'm really hoping we can use Measure W to set clear equity-based performance metrics, but also fund services and programs in a way where there's opportunities to achieve them. Those are two key things that I think we'll focus on. So yeah, happy to share any of the kind of system-wide and program level metrics. Those are really in our big, long, probably not very exciting documents like our countywide written standards and what have you. But the big ones are people getting housed? Are they staying housed? And are we providing the level of service they need? Those are the three big ones.
One other thing I'd like to reiterate, I know I said this earlier, but in case there were folks who joined us later, in terms of transparency and accountability, we heard over and over an interest in having standards around certain things, standards around outreach, standards around shelters, and also, getting more information about if there's an issue with any of these programs that the county funds, what can people do? So helping people understand the grievance process and making sure that the county is responsive. So thank you for nodding, Jonathan. I know you've heard this before.
Yes.
And I think it's just really important because we want this to also improve the system.
That's right.
As well as invest in what works and also invest in, ways that we can incorporate more of people's lived experience.
Yes, thank you for jogging my memory. If I could just tack onto that, Agnes, one of the things we're hoping to do sooner than later, and we'll really be hopefully launching in the coming months, is exactly one of those things you talked about, Supervisor Fortunato Bas, really having a community process to kind of reopen and look at our shelter standards as H&H grows. And, as folks on this call know, whether you access those resources or whether you fund them as a city partner or whether you operate them as a provider partner. Full disclosure, the vast majority of my career was as a provider. So I'm new to the government, but I think that lens is always really central for me. If you've accessed shelter, you know that it is very often a complex mix of players and who's funding it. Often the funders and the providers are dealing with multiple sources. That can make grieving or knowing who you grieve to based on who the funder that holds accountability over that program really difficult to understand, right? I wish that our system was as simple as like, there's just the county. The county funds everything. So if you've got a problem or a grievance in the system, it rolls right up to the county. So while we don't fund everything and have oversight of everything, we are committed to, one, improving the clarity on our process where we have it, but also trying to create a bit of a roadmap to really help direct people quickly based on the program where to go, right? And that really does, obviously, it starts with the provider and it moves then to the funder. That's kind of the process. But on the shelter standards, to jump back to that, that's one of the things that we're really excited in the next year to really bring forward, to update those together, to do that collaboratively with the community, and to do robust engagement to really re-benchmark those standards. And do that in a way that level sets on what it's going to take to meet them. You know, we really need to be funding whatever the county funds. We're committed to funding in a way where they can actually achieve those standards, and we feel comfortable holding folks accountable. So that is going to be coming in the next few months as part of our process as we take on expanded investment through the shelter bed night rate, which will increase the county's investment in many of our existing projects, and those will apply to anything new that we would fund as well. So thank you for flagging that as a concrete thing that we're gonna kick off here as we kick off that expanded investment in the coming months. Stay tuned for that as ways to engage.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Nikki. We received so many more questions kind of in the chat that Dave and I have been assiduously trying to respond to, but we know that we weren't able to get through everything. So if I just want to encourage folks to reach out to our office, you can email me directly. My name is, my email is agnes.cho@acgov.org. And we really are committed to hearing from all of you about what your priorities are and kind of how our office can be in support. And looking at time, I just want to kick it back to Supervisor Fortunato Bas to wrap us up.
Great. Well, thank you again, everyone, for spending your evening with us. There's a lot of hard work and advocacy that went into getting to this 1.4 billion and possibly more investment in homelessness, and really want to appreciate the role that each and every one of you plays. My office really does want to make sure that we are engaging. I want to thank my staff, Dave, Agnes, Cynthia, Aliza, Brianna, and Nikon. They are all out in the community answering emails, answering our phones, and really trying to connect with you so that we can listen, learn, and really share what we are hearing with my colleagues at the county, both supervisors as well as our staff. We want to also make sure that city leadership is also engaged because they need to hear from all of us as well, given that cities are on the front lines of encampment management. And we are going to try to do our best to summarize this and share it out. Our staff at the county Health and Human Services, the Health and Housing and Homelessness Department is also going to do some FAQs, some fact sheets, like you said. So there's more to come. And certainly the board wants to make sure that we are meeting publicly to really have more participation and transparency in how these dollars will be invested. So with that, I'll just say thank you once again. It's always a great learning experience to hear from the community, and I appreciate everyone for joining us. More to come. Thank you.